Alex Rider, Book 2, Chapter 6, The Tunnel. The man sitting in the gold antique chair turned his head slowly and gazed out of the window at the snow-covered slopes of Point Blanc. Dr. Hugo Grief was almost 60 years old, with short white hair and a face that almost looked colourless too. His skin was white, his lips vogue shadows, even his tongue was no more than grey, and yet against this blank background he wore circular wire spectacles with dark red lenses. The effect was startling, and for him the entire world would be the colour of blood. He had long fingers, the nails beautifully manicured. He was dressed in a dark suit, buttoned up to his neck. If there was such a thing as a vampire, it would look very much like Hugo Grief. I have decided to move the Germany project into its last place, he said. He spoke with a South African accent, biting into each word before he left his mouth. There can be no further delay. I understand, Dr. Grief. There was a woman sitting opposite Dr. Grief, dressed in tight-fitting lycra with a sweatband round her head. This was Eva Stellenbosch. She had just finished her morning workout, 2 hours of weightlifting and aerobics exercise, and she was still breathing heavily, her huge muscles rising and falling. Miss Stellenbosch had a facial structure that wasn't quite human, with lips curving out far in front of her nose and wisps of bright ginger hair hanging over a high domed forehead. She was holding a glass filled with some milky green liquid. Her fingers were thick and stubby. She had to be careful not to break the glass. She sipped her drink, then frowned. Are you ready? She asked. We have no choice in the matter. We have two unsatisfactory results in the last few months. First Ivanov, then Roscoe in New York. Quite apart from the expense of overrained determinations, it's possible that someone may have connected the two deaths. Possibly unlikely, Miss Stellenbosch said. The intelligence services are idle and inefficient. It is true. The CIA in America, MI6 in England, even the Russians, they're all shadows of what they used to be. But even so, there's always the chance that one of them might have actually stumbled onto something. The sooner we end this phase of this operation, the more chance we have remaining unnoticed. Dr. Grief brought his hands together and rested his teeth on his fingertips. When is the final boy arriving? He asked. Alex. Miss Stellenbosch emptied her glass and set it down. She opened her handbag and took out a handkerchief which she used to wipe her lips. I am travelling to England tomorrow, she said. Excellent. You take the boy to Paris on the way here. Of course, Doctor, if that is what you wish. It is very much that I wish, Miss Stellenbosch. We can do all the preliminary work there. It'll be save time. What about the Sprints boy? I'm afraid we'll need another few days. That means that he and Alex will be here at the same time? Yes, Dr. Grief considered. He had to balance the risk of the two boys meeting against the dangers of moving too fast. It was fortunate that he had a scientific mind. His calculations were never wrong. Very well, he said. The Sprints boy can stay with us for another few days. Miss Stellenbosch nodded. Alex's friend is an action fact for us, Dr. Grief said. Supermarket? The woman sounded unconvinced. His father had the Prime Minister's ear. He is an impressive man. His son, I am sure, will meet all our expectations. Dr. Grief smiled. His eyes glowed red. Very soon we will have Alex here at the Academy, and then at last the Gemini project will be complete. You're sitting all wrong, Fiona said. Your back isn't straight, your hands should be lower, and your feet are pointing the wrong way. What does it matter so long as you're enjoying yourself? Alex asked, speaking through gritted teeth. It was the fourth day of his stay at Haverstock Hall, and Fiona had taken him out riding. Alex wasn't enjoying himself at all, but before the ride, he had to endure the inevitable lecture. Although he had barely listened, the horses were Iberian or Hungarian. They'd won a bucket full of gold medals. Alex didn't care. All he knew was that his big horse was big and black and attracted flies, and that he was riding it with all the style of a sack of potatoes on a trampoline. The two of them had barely mentioned the business in the forest when Alex had limped back to the house, soaked and freezing. Fiona had politely fetched him a towel and offered him a cup of tea. You tried to kill me, Alex said. Don't be silly. Fiona looked at Alex with something like pity in her eyes. We would never do that. Rufus is a very nice boy. What? It was just a game, Alex. Just a bit of fun. And that was it? Fiona had smiled as if everything he had been explained, and they'd gone to have a swim. Alex had spent the rest of the evening with the flies. He tried to take in a fake history that lasted 14 years. There were uncles and aunts, friends, and even a whole crowd of people he had to know without even having met any of them. More than that, he was trying to get the feel of his luxurious lifestyle. That was why he was here now, out riding with Fiona. She upright in her riding jacket and breeches. He bumping along behind. They had ridden for about an hour and a half. When they came to the tunnel, Fiona had tried to teach Alex a bit of technique. The difference, for example, between walking, trotting, and cantering. But this was one sport he had already decided he would never take up. Every bone in his body had been rattled out of place, and his bottom was bruised. He wondered if he would be able, if his bottom was so bruised, he wondered if he would ever be able to sit down again. Fiona was enjoying his torment. He even wondered if she had chosen a particular bumpy route to add to his bruises, or maybe it was just a particular bumpy horse. There was a single railway line ahead of them, with an automatic level crossing, equipped with a bell and flashing lights to warn motorists of any approaching trains. Fiona steered her horse, a smaller grey, towards it. Alex's horse was automatically followed. He assumed they were going to cross the line, but when she reached the barrier, Fiona stopped. There's a shortcut we can take if you want to get home, she said. A shortcut would be great, Alex admitted. It's that way. Fiona pointed up the line, and there was the tunnel, a gaping black hole in the side of the hill, surrounded by dark red Victorian brick. Alex looked at her to see if she was joking. She was obviously quite serious. He turned back to the tunnel. It was like the barrel of a gun, pointing at him, warning him to keep away. He could almost imagine the giant finger on the trigger, somewhere behind the hill. How long was it? Looking more carefully, he could see a pinprick of light at the other end, perhaps up to a kilometre away. "You're not being serious," he said. "Actually, Alex, you don't usually tell jokes. When I say something, I mean it. I'm just like my father." "Your father isn't barking mad," Alex muttered. Fiona pretended not to hear him. "The tunnel is exactly 1 kilometre long," she explained. There's a bridge on the other side. Then another level crossing. If we go that way, we can be home in 30 minutes. Otherwise, it's an hour and a half the way we came." "Then let's go the way we came." "Oh, Alex, don't be such a scaredy cat." Fiona pouted at him. "There's only one train an hour on this line, and the next one isn't due for—" Looked at her watch. 20 minutes. I've been through the tunnel 100 times, and it never takes more than 5 minutes. Less if you canter. It's so crazy to ride on a railway line." "Well, you have to find your own way home if you turn back." She kicked with her heels, and her horse jerked forward, past the barrier and onto the line. "I'll see you later." But Alex followed her. He would never have been able to ride back to the house on his own. He didn't know the way, and he could barely control the horse. Even now, it was following Fiona with no prompting from him. Would the two animals really enter the darkness of the tunnel? It seemed incredible, but Fiona had said they'd done it before, and sure enough, the horse walked into the side of the hill without even hesitating. Alex shivered as the light was suddenly cut off behind him. It was cold and clammy inside. The air smelled of soot and diesel. The tunnel was a natural echo chamber. The horses' hooves rattled all around them as they struck against the gravel between the sleepers. What if his horse stumbled? Alex put the thought out of his mind. The leather saddles creaked. Slowly his eyes got used to the dark. A certain amount of sunshine was filtering from behind. More comforting. The way out was visible straight ahead. The circle of light widening with every step as they drew nearer. He tried to relax. Perhaps this wasn't going to be so bad after all. And then Fiona spoke. She had slowed down, allowing his horse to catch up with hers. "Are you still worried about the train, Alex?" she said. "Perhaps you'd like to go faster." He heard the riding crop whistle through the air and felt his horse jerk. As Fiona whipped, hit hard on the rear. The horse whined and leaped forward. Alex was thrown backwards almost off the saddle, digging in with his legs. He just managed to cling on, but the top half of his body was at a crazy angle, the reins tearing into the horse's mouth. Fiona laughed. Alex was aware only of the wind rushing past him, the thick blackness spinning round his face, and the horse's hooves striking heavily at the gravel. As the animal careered forward, dust blew in his eyes, blinding him. He thought he was going to fall, but then, miraculously, they had burst out into the light. Alex fought for his balance and brought the horse back under the control, pulling back with the reins and squeezed the horse's flanks with his knees. He took a deep breath, spat out an oath, and waited for Fiona to appear. His horse had come to rest on the bridge that she had mentioned. The bridge was fashioned out of thick iron girders and spanned the river. There had been a lot of rain that month, and about 15 metres below him, the water was racing past, dark and green and deep. Carefully, he turned round to face the tunnel. If he lost control, it would be easy to fall off the edge. The size of the ridge couldn't have been more than a metre high. He could hear Fiona approaching. She had been cantering after him, probably laughing the entire way. He gazed into the tunnel, and that was when the grey burst out, raced past him and disappeared through the level crossing on the other side of the bridge. But Fiona wasn't on it. The horse had come out alone. It took Alex a few seconds to work it out. His head was reeling. She must have fallen off. Perhaps her horse had stumbled She could be lying inside the tunnel on the track. How long was there until the next train? 20 minutes, she said, but at least 5 of those minutes had gone, and she might have been exaggerating to begin this. What did he do? He only had 3 choices. Go back in on foot, go back in on the horse, go home and forget her. No, he only had 2 choices. He knew that he swore for the second time. Then he told of the rain. Somehow he would get this horse to obey him. He had to get the girl out, and he had to do it fast. Perhaps his desperation had managed to communicate itself to the horse's brain. The animal reeled round and tried to back away, but when Alex kicked with his heels, it stumbled forward and recklessly entered the darkness of the tunnel. And a second time Alex kicked again. He didn't want to hurt it, but he could think of no other way to make it obey him. The horse trotted. Alex searched ahead. "Fiona!" he called out. There was no reply. He had hoped that she wouldn't be walking towards him, but he couldn't hear his footsteps. If only there was more light. The horse stopped, and there she was, right in front of him, lying on the ground, her arms and chest actually on the line. If a train came now, it would cut her in half. It was too dark to see her face. When she spoke, he heard the pain in her voice. "Alex," she said, "I think I've broken my ankle." "What happened?" "There was a cobweb or something. I was trying to keep up with you, but it went into my face, and I lost my balance." She'd been trying to keep up with him. She sounded as if she was blaming him, as if she'd forgotten that he had whipped his horse on in the first place. "Can you get up?" Alex asked. "I don't think so," Alex sighed. "Keep a tight hold on the reins." He stood off his horse. Fiona couldn't have timed it better. She had fallen right in the middle of the tunnel. He forced himself not to panic. According to her calculations, the next train must still be at least 10 minutes away. He reached down to help her up. His foot came to rest on one of the rails, and he felt something under his foot shivering up his leg. The track was vibrating. The train was on its way. "You've got to stand up," he said, trying to keep the fear out of his voice. He could always see the train in his imagination, thundering along the line. When it plunged into the tunnel, it would be a 500-ton torpedo that would smash them to pieces. He could hear the grinding on the wheels, the roar of the engine, blood and darkness. It would be a horrible way to die. But he still had time. "Can you move your toes?" "Yes, I think so." Fiona was clutching onto him. "Then your ankle's probably sprained, not broken. Come on." He dragged her up, wondering if it would be possible to stay inside the tunnel at the edge of the track. If they hugged the wall, the train might simply go past them, but Alex knew there wouldn't be enough space. And even if the train missed them, it would still hit the horse. Suppose it derailed? Dozens of people could be killed. What train comes this way?" he asked. "Does it carry passengers?" "Yes." Fiona was sounding tearful. "It's a Virgin train heading up to Glasgow." Alex sighed. It was just his luck to get a Virgin train that arrived on time. Fiona froze. What's that?" she asked. She had heard the clanging of the bell. What was it? Of course, the level crossing. It was signaling the approaching of the train. The barrier lowering itself over the road. And then I heard a second sound that made his blood run cold. For a moment he couldn't breathe. It was extraordinary. His breath had got stuck in his lungs and refused to get up to his mouth. His whole body had been paralyzed. His own body had been paralyzed, as if some switch had been thrown in his brain. He was simply terrified. The screech of the train was still a mile or more away. But the tunnel was acting as a sound conductor, and he could feel it almost cutting into him. And now there was another noise, the rolling thunder of the diesel engine. It was moved fast towards him. Underneath his foot, the rail was vibrating more violently. Alex gulped for air and forced his leg to obey him. "Get on the horse," he shouted. "I'll help you." Not caring how much pain he had caused her, He dragged Fiona next to the horse and forced her up towards the saddle. The noise was getting louder with every second that passed. The rail was humming softly like a giant tuning fork. The very air inside the tunnel seemed to be in motion, spinning left and right as if trying to get out of the way. Fiona squealed and Alex felt her weight leave his arms, and she fell onto the saddle. The horse whined and took a half step sideways, and for a dreadful moment Alex thought she was going to ride off without him. There was just another light to make out the shapes of both the animals and its rider. He saw Fiona grabbing the reins. She brought the horse back onto the control. Alex reached up and caught hold of its mane, using the thick hair to pull himself onto the saddle in front of Fiona. The noise of the approaching train was getting louder and louder. Soot and loose cement was trickling out over the curving walls. The wind currents were twisting faster. The rails singing. For a moment, the two of them were tangled together, but then he had the reins, and she was clinging onto him, her arms around his chest. "Go!" she shouted, and he kicked the horse. The horse needed no encouragement. It raced for the light, galloping up the railway line, throwing Alex and Fiona back and forth into each other. Alex didn't dare look behind him, but he felt the train as it reached the mouth of the tunnel and plunged into it, travelling at 105 miles per hour. A shockwave hammered into them. The train was punching the air out of its way, filling the space with solid steel. The horse understood the danger and burst forward with new speed, its hooves flying over the sleepers in great strides. Ahead of them, the tunnel mouth opened, but Alex knew with a sickening sense of despair they weren't going to make it. Even when they got out of the tunnel, they would still be hemmed in by the sides of the bridge. The second level crossing was 100 meters further down the line. They might get out, but they would die in the open air. The horse passed through the end of the tunnel. Alex felt the circle of darkness slip over his shoulders. Fiona was screaming, her arms wrapped around him so tightly that he could barely breathe. He could hardly hear her. The roar of the train was right behind him as the horse began a desperate race over the bridge. He sneaked a glance around. He had just had time to see the huge metallic beast roar out of the tunnel, towering over them. His body painted the brilliant red of the virgin colours. The driver staring at horror from behind his windows. There was a second blast from the train whistle. This one all-consuming, exploding all around them. Alex knew what he had to do. He pulled one on rein, kicking with the opposite foot. At the same time, he just hoped the horse would understand what he wanted. Somehow it worked. The horse veered around. Now was facing the side of the bridge. There was a final deafening blast from the train. Diesel fumes smothered them. Then the horse jumped. The train roared past, barely missing them, but now they were in the air over the side of the bridge. The carriages were still thundering past the red blur. Fiona screamed again. Everything seemed to be happening in slow motion as they fell. One moment they were next to the bridge, a moment later underneath it, and still fading, the green river rose up to receive them. The horse with its two riders plummeted through the air and crashed into the river. Alex just had time to snatch a breath. He was afraid the water wouldn't be deep enough, that all three of them would end up with broken bones. But they had hit the surface and passed through down into a freezing dark whirlpool that had sucked at them greedily, threatening to keep them there forever. Fiona was torn away from him. He felt the horse kick itself free. Bubbles exploded out of his mouth, and he realized he was yelling. Finally Alex rose to the surface again. The water was rushing past and dragged back by his clothes and shoes. He clumsily swam for the nearest bank. The train driver hadn't stopped. Perhaps he had been too frightened by what had happened. Perhaps he wanted to pretend it hadn't happened at all. The train had gone. Alex reached the bank and pulled himself, shivering, onto the grass. There was a splutter and a cough from behind him, and Fiona appeared. She had lost her riding hat, and her long black hair was hanging over her face. Alex looked past her. Looked past her. The horse had also managed to reach dry land. It trotted forward and shook itself, seeming unharmed. Alex was glad about that. At the end of the day, the horse had saved both their lives. He stood up. Water dripped out of his clothes. There was no feeling anywhere in his body. He wondered if it was because of the cold water, or the shock of what he had just been through. He went over to Fiona and helped her to her feet. "Are you all right?" he asked. Yes. She was looking at him strangely. She wobbled and he put out a hand to steady her. Thank you, she said. That's all right. No, she held her onto his hand. Her shirt had fallen open and she threw back her head, shaking the hair out of her eyes. What you did back there? It was fantastic, Alex. I'm sorry I've been such a beast to you all week. I thought because you were only here for charity and all the rest of it, I thought you were just an oik, but I was wrong about you. You're really great, and I know we're going to be friends now. She half closed her eyes and moved towards him, her lips slightly parted. You can kiss me if you like, she said. Alice let go of her and turned away. Thanks, Fiona, she said, but frankly, I'd prefer to kiss the horse. Chapter 7, Special Edition. The helicopter circled twice over Haverstock Hall before beginning its descent. It was a Robinson R44 four-seater aircraft, American built. There was only one person, the pilot, inside. Sir David Friend had returned from London and he and his wife came outside to watch it land in front of the house. The engine noise died down and the rotors began to slow. The cabin door slid open and the pilot got out just in one piece. Leather flying suit, helmet and goggles. Pilot walked up to them, extending a hand. Good morning, she said. I'm Miss Stellenbosch from the Academy. If Sir David and Lady Caroline had been thrown by their first sight of Alex, the appearance of the assistant director, and she called left them frozen to the spot. Sir David was the first to recover. You flew the helicopter yourself? Yes, I'm qualified. Miss Stellenbosch had to shout over the noise of the rotors, which was still turning. Would you like to come in? Lady Caroline asked. Perhaps you'd like some tea. She led them into the house and through to the living room where Miss Stellenbosch sat, her legs apart, her helmet on the sofa beside her, and Sir David and Lady Caroline sat opposite her. Tea was brought in on a tray. Do you mind if I smoke? Miss Stellenbosch asked. She reached into her pocket and took out a small packet of cigars without waiting for an answer. She lit one and blew smoke. What a very beautiful house you have, Sir David. Georgian, I would say, but decorated with such taste. And where, may I ask, is Alex? He went for a walk, Sir David said. Perhaps he's a little nervous. She smiled again and took the teacup Lady Caroline had preferred. I understand that Alex had been a great source of concern to you. Sir David Friend nodded. His eyes gave nothing away. For the next few minutes he told Miss Stellenbosch about Alex, how he had been expelled from Eton, how out of control he had become. Lady Caroline listened to all of this in silence, crazily holding her husband's arm. I'm at my wit's end, Sir David concluded. We are an older doctor, and she's perfect, but Alex, he hangs around the house, he doesn't read, he doesn't show any interest in anything. His appearance, well, you'll see it for yourself. Point Blanc Academy is our last resort. Miss Stellenbosch is desperately hoping you can sort him out. The assistant director poked at the air with her cigar, leaving a great trail. I'm sure you've been a marvellous father, Sir David, she purred, but these modern children, it's heartbreaking the way some of them behave. You've done the right thing in coming to us. As I'm sure you know, the Academy has a remarkable success rate over the past 11 years. What do you exactly do? Lady Caroline asked. We have our methods. The woman's eyes twinkled. She tapped ash into her saucer. But I can promise you, we'll sort out Alice's problems. Don't you worry. When he comes home, he'll be a completely different boy. Meanwhile, Alex was crossing a field about a kilometre away from the house. He had seen the helicopter land and knew that his time had come, but he wasn't ready to leave yet. Miss Jones had telephoned to him the night before. Once again, MI6 weren't going to send him into what might be enemy territory, empty-handed. He watched as the combine harvester rumbled slowly towards him, cutting a swathe through the grass. He jerked to a halt a short distance away, and the door of the cabin opened. A man got out with difficulty. He was so fat that he had to squeeze himself out. First one buttock, then the next. Finally his stomach, shoulders and head. The man was wearing a checked shirt and blue overall farmer outfit, but even he had a straw hat and a blade of corn between his teeth. Alex could never have imagined him actually farming anything. The man grinned at him. "Hello, old chap," he said. "Hello, Mr. Smithers," Alex replied. Smithers worked for MI6. He had supplied the various devices Alex had used on his last mission. "Very nice to see you again," he said. He went, "What do you think of the cover?" I was told to blend in with the countryside. "The combined harvester is a great idea," Alex said. "Except this is April, there isn't anything to harvest." I hadn't thought of that. Mrs. beamed. "Trouble is, not really field agent." "Field agent?" He looked around him and laughed. "Anyway, I'm jolly to have the chance to work with you again, Alex. To think up a few bits and pieces for you. It's not often I get a teenager much more fun than the adults." He reached into the cabin and pulled out a suitcase. "Actually, it's been a tricky this time. Have you got another Nintendo DS? Have you got another Nintendo DS?" Alex asked. "No, that's just it. The school doesn't allow game consoles, personally computers. They won't even let you bring a mobile phone, so you can forget about the internet. It's a great shame. I have hidden the darn gadgets inside a laptop, but there you are. Now let's see." He opened the case. "I told there's a lot of snow up at Point Blanc, so you'll need these." "A ski suit?" Alex said. That was what Smithers was holding? A ski suit? Yes, but it's highly insulated and also bulletproof. He pulled out a pair of green-tinted goggles. "These are ski goggles, but in case you have to go anywhere at night, they're actually infrared. Just press the switch and you'll be able to see for about 20 meters if there's no moon. Oh, and by the way, I popped the GPS receiver in the top pocket." He showed it to Alex. It was about the size of a watch with a digital display and a single button on the side. "GPS for global positioning system. Lots of skiers use them if they got lost off piste. But this one is a little different. It's a panic button. If the balloon goes up and you need help, just press the button 3 times. It will send us out a signal which our satellite will pick up there, and then we come to the rescue." Smithers reached into the case a 3rd time. "One last thing. I must say, a skiing trip provides all sorts of possibilities," he continued. "Hand warmers." He showed Alex half a dozen brightly colored plastic packs. "But I wouldn't have used them to warm your hands if I were you. 30 seconds after you tear open the packet, they'll burn to anything." Thank you, Mr. Smithers," Alex said. He was disappointed, and it showed. Smithers understood. "I know what you want," he said, "but you know you can't have it. No guns. Mr. Blunt is a damp. He thinks you're too young. Not too young to get killed, though." "Yes, well, I've given it a bit of thought and rustled up a couple of defensive measures. So to speak, it's just between you and me. You understand? I'm not sure Mr. Blunt would approve." He held out a hand. There was a gold-edged stud lying 2 pieces in the middle of his palm, a diamond shape for the front, and a catch to hold it at the back. The stud looked tiny, surrounded by so much flesh. "They told me you'd had your earpiece pierced. He said, so I made you these. Be very careful after you pull it in. Bringing the two pieces together will activate it. Activate what? Alex looked doubtful. The ear-stud is a small but very powerful explosive device. Separating two pieces again will set it off. Count to 10 and it'll blow a hole in just about anything. Or anyone, I should add. Just so long as it doesn't blow my ear off, Alex muttered. No. It's perfectly safe, so long as the pieces remain attached. Smithers smiled. And finally, I am very pleased with these. It's exactly what you'd expect any young boy leaving for school to be given. And I bought it especially for you. He had produced a book. Alex took it. It was a hardback edition of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Thanks, he said, but I've already read it. I've already read Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. This is a special edition. There's a gun built into the spine, and the chamber is loaded with a stun dart. Just point it and press the author's name on the spine. It will knock out an adult in less than 5 seconds. Alex smiled. Smithers climbed back into the combine harvester. For a moment he seemed to have wedged him permanently into the doorway, but then with a grunt he managed to go the whole way. Good luck, old chap, he said. Come back in one piece, and I really do quite enjoy having you around. It was time to go. Alex's luggage was being loaded into the helicopter, and he was standing next to his parents. Clutching the Harry Potter book. Eva Stellenbosch was waiting for him beneath the rotors. He had been shocked by her appearance. And at first he tried to hide it, but then he'd relaxed. He didn't have to multiply it. Alex Ryder might be a well-mannered, but Alex's friend wouldn't give a damn what she thought. He glanced at her scornfully now and noticed she was watching him carefully as he said goodbye to the friends. Once again, Sir David acted his part perfectly. Goodbye, Alex, he said. You will write to us and let us know you're okay. If you want, Alex said. Lady Callie moved forward and kissed him. Alex backed away from her as if embarrassed. He had to admit that she looked genuinely sad. Come, Alex. Stellenbosch was in a hurry to get away. He told him that they would need to stop in Paris to refuel. And Fiona appeared, crossing the lawn towards them. Alex hadn't spoken to her since the business at the tunnel, nor had he spoken to him. He rejected her, and he knew she would never forgive him. She hadn't come down to breakfast this morning, and he'd assumed she wouldn't show herself again until he'd gone. So what was she doing here now? Suddenly Alex knew she'd come to cause trouble. One last jab below the belt. He could see it in her eyes, and in the way she flounced across the lawn with her hands rolled into her fists. Fiona didn't know he was a spy, but she must known that he was here for a reason. She had probably guessed it had something to do with the woman from Point Blanc. So she had decided to come out and spoil things for him. Maybe she was going to ask questions. Maybe she was going to tell Miss Stellenbosch that he wasn't really her brother. Either way, Alex knew that his mission would be over before it had even begun. All his work memorizing the files and all the time he had spent with the family would have been for nothing. Fiona, so David nodded. His eyes were grave. He had come to the same conclusion as Alex. She ignored him. Are you here for Alex? She asked, speaking directly to Miss Stellenbosch. Yes. Well, I think there's something you should know. There was only one thing Alex could do. He lifted the book and pointed at Fiona, then pressed the spine once. There was no noise, but he felt the book shudder in his hands. Fiona put her hand to the side of her leg. All the colour drained out of her face. She crumbled to the grass. Lady Caroline ran over to her. Miss Stellenbosch looked puzzled. His face blank. That's my sister, he said. She was very emotional. 2 minutes later, the helicopter took off. Alex watched through the window as Haverstock Hall got smaller and smaller and then disappeared behind them. He looked at Miss Stellenbosch, hunched over the who hunched over the controls, her eyes hidden by her goggles. He eased himself into the seat and let himself be carried away into the darkening sky. Then the clouds rolled in. The countryside was gone. So was his only weapon. Alex was on his own. Chapter 8. Room 13. It was raining in Paris. The city was looking tired and disappointed. The Eiffel Tower fighting against a mass of heavy cloud. There was nobody sitting at the tables spread outside the cafes, and for once the little kiosks selling painting and posters were being ignored by the tourists hurrying back to their hotels. It was 5 o'clock in the afternoon and the evening was drawing in. The shops and offices were emptying, but the city didn't care. It just wanted to be left alone. The helicopter had landed in the private area of Charles de Gaulle Airport, and the car had been waiting to drive them in. Alex had said nothing during the flight, and now he sat on his own in the back watching the buildings flash by. They were following the scene, moving surprisingly fast along a wide dual carriage that dipped above and below the water level. Their route took them past Notre Dame. Then they turned off, weaving their way through a series of black streets with small restaurants and boutiques fighting for space on the pavement. That's Marais, Miss Stellenbosch said. Alice pretended not to show interest. In fact, he had stayed in Marais district once before and knew it as one of the smartest and most expensive quarters of Paris. The car turned into a large square and stopped. Alex glanced out of the window. He was surrounded on four sides by the tall, classical houses for which Paris is famous. But the square had been disfigured by a single modern hotel. It was a white rectangular block, the windows fitted with the dark glass that allowed no view to the inside. It rose up 4 floors with a flat roof, and the name Hotel du Monde in gold letters. Hotel du Monde in gold letters above the main door. If the spaceship had landed in the square, crossing a couple of buildings to make room for itself, it couldn't have looked more out of place. This is where we're staying, Miss Stellenbosch said. The hotel is owned by the Academy. The driver had taken their cases out of the boot. Alex followed the assistant director towards the entrance, the door sliding open automatically to allow them in. The reception was cold and faced with white marble, and there was with a single potted plant tucked into a corner. As the afterdoor, there was a small reception desk with an unsmiling male receptionist in a dark suit and glasses, a computer, and a row of pigeonholes. Alice counted them. There were 15. Presumably, the hotel had 15 rooms. Bonjour, Madame Stellenbosch. The receptionist nodded his head slightly. He ignored Alex. I hope you've had a good journey from England. He continued, still speaking French. Alex gazed blankly as if he hadn't understood a word. Alex's friend wouldn't speak French. He wouldn't have bothered to learn, but Iron Maid had made certain that his nephew spoke French almost as soon as he spoke English, not to mention German and Spanish as well. The receptionist took down 2 keys. He didn't ask either of them to sign in. He didn't ask for a credit card. No school owned the hotel, so there would be no bill when they left. He gave Alex one of the keys. I hope you are not superstitious, he said, speaking in English now. No, Alex replied. It is room 13 on the first floor. I'm sure you will find it most agreeable. The receptionist smiled. Miss Stellenbosch took her key. The hotel was its rest. The hotel is its own restaurant, she said. We might as well eat here tonight. We don't want to go out in the rain. Anyway, the food here is excellent. Do you like French food, Alex? Not much, Alex said. But I'm sure we'll find something that you like. Why don't you freshen up after the journey? She looked at her watch. We'll eat at 7, an hour and a half from now. It will give us an opportunity to talk together. Might I suggest perhaps some smarter clothes for dinner? The French are informal, but if you forgive me saying so, my dear, you take informality a little far. I'll call you at 5 to 7. I hope the room is all right. Room 13 was at the end of a long, narrow corridor. The door opened in a surprisingly large space with views over the square. There was a double bed with a black and white cover, a television and mini bar, a desk on the wall, a couple of framed pictures of Paris. A porter had carried out Alex's cases, and as soon as he was gone, Alex kicked off his shoes and sat down on the bed. He wondered why they had come here. He knew the helicopter had needed refueling, but that shouldn't have necessitated an overnight stop. Why not fly straight onto the school? He had more than an hour to kill. First he went into the bathroom, more glass and white marble, and took a long shower, then wrapped in a towel. He went back into the room and put the television on. Alex's friend would watch a lot of television. There were about 30 channels to choose from. Alex skipped past the French ones and stopped on MTV. He wondered if he was being monitored. There was a large mirror next to the desk, and it would have been easy enough to conceal the camera behind it. Why not give them something to think about? He opened the minibar and poured himself a glass of gin. Then he went into the bathroom, refilled the bottle with water, and put it back in the fridge. Drinking alcohol and stealing. If he was watching, Miss Stellenbosch would know that she had her hands full with him. He spent the next 40 minutes watching television and pretending to drink the gin. Then he took the glass into the bathroom and dumped it in the sink, allowing the liquid to run out. It was time to get dressed. Should he do what he was told and put on smart clothes? In the end, he compromised. He put on a shirt but kept the same jeans. A moment later, the telephone rang. His call to dinner. Miss Stellenbosch was waiting for him in the restaurant, an airless room in the basement. Soft lighting mirrors had been used to make it feel more spacious. It was the last place Alex would have chosen. The restaurant could have been anywhere in any part of the world. There were 2 other diners, businessmen by the look of them, but otherwise they were alone. Miss Stellenbosch had changed into a black evening dress with feathers at the collar, and she wore an antique-looking hood of black and silver beads. The smarter her clothes, Alex thought, the uglier she looked. She was smoking another cigar. Ah, Alex, you smoke? Did you have a rest or did you watch TV? Alex didn't say anything. He sat down and opened the menu and then closed it again. When he saw that it was all French, you must let me order for you. Some soup to start, perhaps? And then a steak? I'd never yet met a boy who doesn't like steak. And then a steak. I've never yet met a boy who doesn't like steak. My cousin Oliver is a vegetarian, Alex said. It was something I'd read in one of the files. The assistant director nodded as if she already knew this. Then he doesn't know what he is missing, she said. Then he doesn't know what he is missing, she said. A pale-faced waiter came over and she placed the order in French. What will you drink, she had. I'll have Coke. A repulsive drink, I always think. I have never understood the taste. But of course, you shall have what you want. The waiter bought Alex a Coke and a glass of champagne for Miss Stellenbosch. Alex watched the bubbles rising into the 2 glasses. Hers a pale gold. Santé, she said. I'm sorry. It's French for good health. Oh, Cheers! There was a moment's silence. The woman's eyes were fixed on him, as if she could see right through him. So you were at Eton, she said casually. That's right. Alex was suddenly on his guard. What house were you in? The Hop Garden. It was the name of a real house at school. Alex had read the file carefully. I visited Eton once. I remember the statue. I think it was the king. I was just through the main gate. She was testing him. Alex was sure of it. Did she suspect it, or was it simply a precaution? Something she always did. We're talking about Henry VI, he said. His statues in College Yard. He found Eton, but you didn't like it there. No, why not? I didn't like the uniform, and I didn't like the beaks. Alex was careful not to use the word teachers at Eton. They were known as beaks. He half smiled to himself. If she wanted a bit of the Eton speak, he'd give it to her. And I didn't like the rules, getting fined by the pot or being put into the tardy book. I was always getting rips and infos or being put on the bill. The divs were boring. I'm afraid I don't understand a word you're saying. Divs are lessons, Alice explained. Rips are when your work is no good. All right. She drew a line with her cigar. Is that why you set fire to the library? No. That was just because I don't like books. The first course arrived. Alex's soup was yellow and had something floating in it. He picked up his spoon and poked it superstitiously. What's this? He demanded. Soup de moles. He looked at her blankly. Moose sloop. I hope you enjoy it. I prefer to have hen's tomato. Alex said. The steaks, when they came, were typically French, barely cooked at all. He took a couple of mouthfuls of the bloody meat, then threw down his knife and fork and used his finger to eat the chips. Miss Stellenbosch talked to him about the French Alps, about skiing, and about her visits to various European cities. It was easy to look bored. He was bored. He was beginning to feel tired. He took a sip of Coke, hoping the cold drink would wake him up. The meal seemed to be dragging on all night. But at last the pudding's ice cream with white chocolate sauce had come and gone. Alex declined coffee. You look tired, Stellenbosch said. She had lit another cigar. The smoke curled around her head and made him feel dizzy. Would you like to go to bed? Yes. We don't need to leave until midday tomorrow. You'll have to have time for a visit to the Louvre. If you'd like that, Alex shook his head. Actually, paintings bore me. Really, what a shame. Alex stood up. Somehow, his hand knocked into his glass spinning glass of the Coke over the pristine white tablecloth. What was the matter with him? Suddenly, he was exhausted. Would you like me to come up with you, Alex? The woman asked. She was looking carefully at him, a tiny glimmer of interest in her otherwise dead eyes. No, I'll be all right, Alex stepped away. Good night. Getting upstairs was an ordeal. He was tempted to take the lift, but he didn't want to lock himself into that small windowless cubicle. He would have felt suffocated. He climbed the stairs, his shoulders resting heavily against the wall, stumbling down the corridor, and somehow got the key into the lock. When he finally got inside, the room was spinning. What was going on? Had he drunk more of the gin that he had intended, or was he? Alex swallowed. He had been drugged. There was something in the Coke. It was still on his tongue, a sort of bitterness. There was only 3 steps between him and his bed, but it couldn't have been a mile away. His legs wouldn't obey him anymore. Just lifting one foot took all his strength. He fell forward, reaching out with his arms. Somehow he managed to propel himself far enough. His chest and shoulders hit the bed, sinking into the mattress. The room was spinning around him faster and faster. He tried to stand up, to try to speak, but nothing came. His eyes closed. Gratefully, he allowed the darkness to take him. 30 minutes later, there was a soft click, and the room began to change. If Alex had been able to open his eyes, he would have seen the desk, the minibar, and the framed pictures of Paris begin to rise up the wall. also might have seemed to him. But in fact the walls weren't moving. The floor was sinking on hidden hydraulics taken to bed with Alex on it into the depths of the hotel. The entire room was nothing more than a huge lift which was carrying him 1 centimetre at a time into the basement and beyond. Now the walls were metal sheets. He had left the wallpaper, the lights, and the bridges high above him. He was dropping through what might have been a ventilation shaft, with 4 steel rods guiding him to the bottom. Brilliant light suddenly flooded over him. There was another soft click. He had arrived. The bed had come to a rest in the centre of a gleaming underground clinic. Scientific equipment crowded in on him from all sides. There were a number of cameras, digital videos, infrared, and X-ray. There were instruments of all shapes and sizes. Many of them unrecognizable. A tangle of wires spiraled out from each machine to the bank of computers that hummed and blinked on a long work table against one of the walls. A window had been cut into the wall. On the outside, the room was air-conditioned. Had Alex been awake, he might have shivered in the cold. His breath appeared as a faint white cloud hovered over his mouth. A plump man wearing a white coat was waiting to receive him. The man was about 40, with yellow hair slicked back, and a face that was rapidly sinking into middle age, with puffy cheeks and thick, fatty neck. The man had glasses and a small moustache. He had two assistants with him. They were also wearing white coats. Their faces were blank. The 3 of them set to work at once, handling Alex as if he was a sack of vegetables or a corpse. They picked him up and stripped off all his clothes. Then they began to photograph him using a conventional camera to begin with. Staring at his toes, they moved upwards, clicking of at least 100 pictures flashing, igniting, and the film automatically spooking forward. Not 1 inch of his body had escaped their examination. A lock of his hair was snipped off and slid into a plastic envelope. An ophthalmoscope was used to produce a perfect image of the black of his eye. They made a moulding of his teeth, slipping a piece of putty into his mouth and manipulating his chin to make him bite down. They made a careful note of the birthmark on his left shoulder, the scar on his arm, and even his fingerprints. Alex bit his nails. That was recorded too. Finally, they weighed him on a large flat scale and they measured him. His height, chest weight, inside leg, hand side, and so on, making a note of every measurement on clipboards. And all the time, Miss Stellenbosch watched. From the other side of the window, she never moved. The only sign of life anywhere in her face was a cigar clammed between her lips. It glowed red, and then the smoke trickled up. The 3 men had finished. The one with the yellow hair spoke into a microphone. "We're all done," he said. Give me your opinion, Mr. Baxter." The woman's voice echoed out of a concealed speaker. "It's a cinch." The man called Baxter was English. He spoke with an upper-class accent, and he was obviously pleased with himself. "He's got a good bone structure, very fit, interesting face. You noted the piercing? He's had that done recently. Not else to say, really. When will you operate?" "Whatever you say, old girl. Just let me know." Miss Stellenbosch told the other 2 men. Rappy Leslie. She snapped the 2 words. The 2 assistants put Alex's clothes back on him again. This took longer than taking them off. As they worked, they made a careful note of all the brand names. The Levy shirt, the Paul Smith socks. By the time they had dressed him, they knew as much about him as a doctor knows about a newborn baby. It had been noted down, and the information would be passed on. Mr. Baxter walked over to the work table and pressed a button. At once, the carpet, bed, and hotel furniture began to rise up. They disappeared through the ceiling and kept going. Alex slept on as he was carried back up the shaft, finally arriving in space that he knew as Room 13. There was nothing to show what had happened. The whole experience had evaporated as quickly as a dream. Right, everybody, that's the end of me reading you today's book. So, bye everyone, and thank you for listening to this book.